When you really get right down to it, the essence of religion begins with an experience, and it comes often from feeling and lived experience. So it's hard to talk about religion often in rational terms, particularly with people who are religious believers. So today we're going to be talking about the source of religious wonder, where religions come from in the experience and in the minds of people who believe. This is a long quote, and anybody that tells you anything about remote learning tells you not to put huge amounts of text on a screen. But I want you to read this with me. This is Huston Smith, who's a famous professor at MIT, who talks about the human desire for religion. Ever since man appeared on this planet, he seems to have been searching for an object that he could love, serve, and adore wholeheartedly. An object which, being of the highest and most permanent beauty and perfection, would never permit his love for it to dwindle, deteriorate, or suffer frustration. The search has led to difficulties. It has brought him face to face with calamity and taken from him a toll of heavy sacrifice, including the sacrifice of life itself. Yet he persists. Excuse the gendered language here. The relentless urge of his nature compels him to continue at all costs. The entire history of humanity, political, moral, legal, socio-cultural, intellectual, economic, and religious, from earliest times to the present day, is the record of man's search for some beckoning object. Notice here the emphasis on search, urge, human nature, the desire for beauty and perfection, which seems to be almost aesthetically part of our nature. So my questions for you, and these are things for you to think about on your own time, is this really something that we naturally, psychologically, and biologically do? Do we seek meaning and purpose as part of our being? And if so, why do we do it? The second question is about the belief in God. Is it necessary for a belief in God to give your life the necessary meaning and purpose? And if you don't believe in God, then what are you doing instead that gives it that purpose? These are important questions just in terms of living life in general, and all that more poignant in the face of a situation like the one we're in now with COVID. So at the heart of religious experience is something called the numinous. The numinous is a non-rational experience of the divine. The numinous is also something that is referred to in Christian terms as rapture, but it really comes down to something, it's a little bit like if you're in love or you have a very strong feeling that you just can't rationally explain, a feeling of connection, a feeling of deep purpose that comes from something beyond your rational mind. This is something called the numinous, and it's a term that we'll be coming back to. So we can talk about the sources of religious wonder. I would ask you in your notes to jot some things down, the things that make you wonder about bigger things, or the places that make you wonder about bigger things. So a few terms that we should be familiar with. Numinous, the theologian Otto, who some of you have read, talks about this experience and the importance of it. The other word is the ineffable, something that is bigger than something you can describe in words, also an important word in religion. Frequently, you'll hear people saying, well, you can't describe this experience, it just is something deep. The word religion, right, comes back to this idea of tying oneself back to something bigger than yourself, which is also interesting because if you look at the Latin root religare, to restrain and to tie back to, it's interesting to think about what it is that you're restraining to get you back to something bigger than yourself. And I'm going to leave that as a question now, but we're going to get to that later. These are some sources of religious wonder. Some of these might be things you've already referenced. Hiking in the mountains, seeing a sunset, surfing, seeing the Earth from space. Astronauts, almost to a person, have had spiritual experiences seeing the Earth from above. It creates a sense of place, a sense of purpose and meaning in a way that transcends individual religious beliefs and gets at larger senses of meaning. So, a few more questions for you to consider. How would you encourage a religious experience if you're building a building or you're building a tradition of your own? What kinds of things would you do? What sorts of practices, what sorts of communal elements would you build in to encourage a sense of the numinous? What kind of building, if you're an architect, would you build to encourage a sense of religious wonder? Would it have light? Would it be complex? Would it be simple? And the last thing I would have you think about, and it's kind of implicit in what I've gotten at so far, is what are the limitations that exist in terms of describing or understanding religious experience? This is something that's very hard for people who've been studying this a long time to even begin to approach. But why is it hard for us in intellectual, rational terms to discuss something which is neither of those things? So some examples of, sorry, the text isn't clear here, that left is from St. Peter's, light effects from the St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome. And on the right, the ecstasy of St. Teresa, having a numinous experience, experiencing the love of God directly. You can see the impact of light there in the features of this piece too. This is Il Gesù in Rome. This is a Jesuit-built church, again, with light effects, creating the sense of the numinous in architecture and art. Upward lifting, spaciousness, crowding as well. So, there's more to add here, but I'm going to leave it at that. And the next time through, we'll begin to talk about brain science. But for now, try to think about the larger purpose of what religion serves in the human spirit. And if you have your own religious experiences or your own sense of the numinous, hopefully you'll feel free to explore them, discuss them, and share them with us when we get back to class together.